Good morning, afternoon, or evening. I'm Ingrid Froland from Edmonton, Alberta. I will be doing a review of Michael Fullan's 2009 article, Large Scale Reform Comes of Age. To begin, we will take a quick look at some working definitions, review the pre-1997 education reform timeframe, the 1998 to 2002 era, where some more focused efforts on education reform were made, followed by the 2003 to 2009 timeframe, during which Fullan describes some success stories and their characteristics, and then Fullan's thoughts moving past 2009. At the end, I will draw attention to a few themes that reoccurred throughout the article. On most slides, I have included a red thought bubble that contains a possible discussion prompt for this week's post. Michael Fullan is quite familiar to most education leaders and academics. He is a well-known author of many books and articles on education leadership, reform, and culture. He also served as Ontario Premier Dalton's Special Policy Advisor from 2003 to 2013. His focus for this article was on large-scale reform, meaning focused, intentional policies and strategies that successfully evolve whole education systems. When referencing a system, this means all levels of government, schools, communities, and districts in the education network. Has anyone read one of Michael Fullan's books? If so, which one? What was the takeaway? And would you recommend it? The pre-1950s era was suggested to be the progressive period of system reform. There were lots of academic and intellectual reform ideas, but it was thought they would just take flight on their own without a plan. In the late 1950s, 60s, or also called the adoption era, there was an influx of many education reform ideas, be it academic programs, organizational innovations such as open plan schools or flexible scheduling, and also pedagogical reforms such as team teaching. These did not come with strategic implementation plans. The 1990s saw accountability schemes increase, but did not result in progress. This was thought to be due to the lack of capacity in the structures and the human systems. Conclusions at the end of this time frame indicated that education systems are complex. Schools need to teach learning processes that better fit the way work is evolving, and teaching the skills and habits of mind that are essential to problem solving, especially where many minds need to interact. Some of these ideas and themes have been popular since the 1960s, and we still repeat them today, even though the world is arguably very different. Why is this? Why haven't the questions changed? The 1997 to 2002 was the first era where explicit theory of large-scale change was applied. Tony Blair of England made education his top priority with a national literacy and numeracy strategy to improve achievements of 11-year-olds in all primary schools. The 6 key elements that are noted for his plan are ambitious standards, good data with clear targets, developed responsibility with the stakeholders, access to best practice and quality professional development, accountability and intervention in inverse proportion to success. And all of these elements ended up contributing to proficiency rates increasing at least 11% in both areas of numeracy and literacy. There is some debate in interpreting the results, but in the end, it seems that the academics agreed it was a successful reform. Achievement did, however, eventually plateau. In the United States during this time, there was no national strategy, there was no explicit change theory, no progress, and achievement gaps actually continued to widen. There were some reform efforts, but they weren't systematic, and only a few school models showed any kind of effects, and again, results were not sustained. So this time frame made it evident that the longevity of reform is a problem. Few schools institutionalize reforms that persist through the years. Fullan suggested a possible explanation is that strategies in reform do not take context into consideration. So schools are incredibly different, and Fullan writes about how transplanted reform initiatives don't usually work. Do you have an example of a system reform initiative that had the flexibility to be implemented in site-specific ways? So continuing on in the same era, sometimes when looking at success stories, the question arises, does success need to be a self-conscious strategy? When we look at Alberta, at that time had commonly ranked in the top 5 countries for assessment, and credit was given to good quality teachers, administrators, good relationships among teacher unions, districts, trustees, universities, and the government. Fullan does mention that Alberta is blessed with strong natural resources, so a strong financial base, innovative capacity building, and accountability. Fullan didn't go into detail in this article about how influential it was that Alberta maintained an incredibly consistent government, 40 years with the Progressive Conservatives in office, which allowed for a very consistent vision, consistent messaging, financial planning, and relationship building, rather than a government that was focused on getting re-elected every 4 years. Specifically, the leadership of David Hancock, serving as the Minister of Education for some years, contributed to the vision and development of AC, which is the Alberta Initiative for School Improvement. Dave Hancock and his PC government advocated for system-wide commitment to educational innovation and risk, which Hargreaves describes as one of the basic principles of organizational innovation and improvement. This government started the Provincial Achievement Tests, or PATs, to increase accountability. They had unique policy and strategies to promote innovation and increase engagement. I fear that many of these factors that contributed to Alberta's success are not flourishing as they once were. Stability and relationships between system leaders have deteriorated. Ontario's Conservative government at this time went the opposite route. By centralizing districts, they established an assessment agency, they reduced the budget, and relationships with teachers were stressed. Fullan notes that literacy and numeracy performance during this time frame for Ontario flatlined. So risk-taking was historically encouraged in Alberta, which allowed for innovation and agency in the profession. Is professional risk-taking rewarded in your system? So Finland. It would be a mistake to not bring up Finland if you're talking about success stories, and they made their major headways in the world rankings starting in the 1990s. It's believed that this was due to decisive action to invest in a countrywide economic turnaround and set about designing creative, high-skilled, high-wage knowledge economy. Their education system is not as influenced by the cycles of government, which gives it stability and the ability to plan. So moving on to the next era, the 2003 to 2009. It was considered the era of professionalizing system reform by Barber, 2008. In the USA, there were some improvements, but nothing really noteworthy. The No Child Left Behind was deemed a failure due to too many and too narrow tests, short timelines, little capacity building, and punitive strategies. There was agreement on factors that influence reform in this time frame, though, such as high-quality teachers, and that it's necessary for leaders and teachers to work together for student learning. Fullan stresses here that one cardinal rule in system reform is never, ever endorse one factor at a time. The interaction of a few powerful factors is where results actually lie. The top 6 ranking systems at this time were Finland, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and then Canada, which essentially was Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, and South Korea. Policies and strategies are the factors that are thought to account for the differences with these countries was high-quality staff, focused strategies for developing continuous quality pedagogy, developing instructionally focused leaders, and data-based decision-making. So Finland does not have national achievement tests. Alberta found success when implementing standardized tests. Sometimes it seems that PATs are holding us back from reform progress. There's little incentive for classrooms in a PAT year to try reform when their PAT results are published and analyzed publicly. Can you relate to this idea? So 2009 onwards. There's still debates around how much top-down control compared to bottom-up freedom is necessary for successful reform. Fullan stresses on a new type of approach that includes attention to soft skills, such as humility, listening to others with different viewpoints, respect, humble confidence, and that sort of thing. He goes into more detail in one of his books, The 6 Secrets of Change, and he describes the positive effect of things like love your employees, connect peers with purpose, focused capacity building, and transparency. Fullan mentions the visible learning of John Hattie in 2008 as a direction that education will go. He was right on this one. John Hattie's research has taken off since then and become even more robust. My school division has hired Hattie's organization to do intensive capacity building with our administrators this year based on his work. So Fullan describes Barber and Hargreaves, both reform researchers who believe in different approaches. Barber thinks it's no longer about the right agenda, but how to actually implement it. Hargreaves believes there should be less command and control and more professional involvement and public engagement. Where do you sit on the spectrum? So lastly, the United States showed us some promise with Obama's U.S. American Recovery and Investment Act of 2009. Fullan predicts a widening and deepening of system reform moving past 2009. So that will include larger system focus, attention to non-school factors that have an impact on school performance, early childhood education, parent education, after-hours programs, and poverty reduction. Now, it has been 14 years since this article was published. Fullan predicted a greater system reform was coming after 2009. Do you think his prediction came to fruition? Why or why not? So some recurring themes throughout this article was the idea of tri-level reform, so including school districts and governments together. Can system reform be successful without planning in all three areas? Another recurring theme was the necessity of high-quality professional staff. How do we achieve this? What level should we focus on? Secondary school, university, or perhaps talent-seeking and keeping initiatives at the district level? And finally, capacity building was repeatedly mentioned throughout the article. What is your understanding of capacity building? And do you have examples of how to achieve this at the school, district, or government levels to foster reform?